guys, it's Phil here from TechSmart, and today we're going to be doing a full in-depth comparison of the brand new Nexus 5 and the iPhone 5S. So starting off, let's take a look at the size. The Nexus 5 is 5.4 inches tall by 2.72 inches wide and just 0.34 inches thick. The iPhone 5S, on the other hand, is a bit smaller at 4.87 inches tall by 2.31 inches wide and just 0.3 inches thick. Now, feeling the phones in the hand, obviously the Nexus 5 is a bit larger, and that is due to the screen. As far as the weight goes, they feel roughly the same, but on paper, the Nexus 5 is 4.59 ounces, and the iPhone 5S is 3.95 ounces. Taking a look at the screens on these two devices, the Nexus 5 looks beautiful. It's a 5-inch IPS display, the resolution is 1920 by 1080, and with that 5-inch screen size, it makes it a PPI of 445. And honestly, the video doesn't do it justice, guys. It's sharp, it's clear, it's just a beautiful looking display. With the iPhone 5S, it's gorgeous as well. It's 4-inch IPS display. The resolution is 640 by 1136. However, the PPI is almost 100 less at 326 PPI. Therefore, the screen isn't necessarily as sharp. However, it is on a smaller screen, so you're really going to have to squint your eyes to look for pixels. Now, the processor in the Nexus 5 is outstanding. It has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 800. It's a quad-core chip clocked at 2.3 gigahertz. There's 2 gigabytes of RAM, and it's running the Adreno 330 graphics. The iPhone 5S is no slouch whatsoever. It has the Apple A7 64-bit processor. Now, that's a dual-core 1.3 gigahertz processor. There's also the M7 coprocessor to help calculate motion, as well as to detect orientation on the phone. And as far as graphics, it's rocking the PowerVR G6430 graphics. Taking a look at the actual software on these two devices, the Nexus 5 is of course running the brand new Android 4.4 KitKat. It looks really nice. The icons are a bit larger, there's a lot more minimal theming going on, and there's much better and deeper integration into all the Google services. For one, the new Hangouts app does integrate SMS. We actually made a whole video talking about the hidden features of KitKat, so be sure to check the annotation on screen or the link in the description below to check out that video. On the iPhone 5S, however, it's running iOS 7, which is still fairly new. It was definitely a different look over iOS 6. It's much simpler, however, there is going to be less customization over Android, but again, it's going to be easier to use and just, it is what it is. On the Nexus 5, you have Google Now, whereas the iPhone 5 is rocking Siri, which is no longer in beta. Google Now on Android 4.4 KitKat, or the Nexus 5 for now, is updated to work a lot better. It's also a lot more accessible, so you can say the action, "Okay Google," from anywhere within the launcher, or really anywhere in the phone rather, and it's going to go ahead and access Google Now, so you can go ahead and start asking questions. For a brief comparison for Google Now versus Siri, it seems that Google Now is going to be a little bit quicker, and of course Siri is going to be more conversational. However, at the end of the day, these are two very different products. They just appear to be very similar at the first glance. Google Now is going to integrate more so with your life, giving you updates about what's going on, as well as pulling in information from your email, whereas Siri is more so there to help you out at that direct moment instead of giving you notifications like Google Now does. So, of course, we're going to have to benchmark these two phones since they are the top dogs of the Android world and the iOS world. We had to do a Geekbench 3 as well as a GFX bench. Now, like I said before, the Nexus 5 is rocking the Adreno 330 graphics, and the iPhone 5S is rocking the PowerVR G6430 graphics. So Geekbench has ran its test, and according to the single core score, the Nexus 5 scored a 857, the iPhone 5S scored a 1414. As for the multi-core score, the iPhone 5S scored a 2559, and the Nexus 5 scored a 2544. So according to Geekbench, on paper, it scored higher than the Nexus 5, meaning it's technically faster. However, obviously in day-to-day use, that is going to definitely fluctuate. Now, after the GFX bench, I simply just did the T-Rex HD benchmark. There's a whole ton that I could have tested out. I just figured we'll pick this one because it is pretty true to defining how well the graphics are going to perform. Basically, on the Nexus 5, it scored 23 frames per second on average, and on the iPhone 5S, it scored 26 frames per second. So again, right here through benchmarks, the iPhone 5S has beat out the Nexus 5, but like I said before, in day-to-day use, these scores are clearly going to fluctuate depending on how you use your phone and the type of content that you're consuming. Now, in addition to benchmarking the performance on these devices, we also wanted to show you guys a speed test for the data speeds. Now, the 5 and the iPhone 5S are both connected to the same Wi-Fi network. We're running the test at different times just so neither one of them hinders our Wi-Fi in the house. So the scores are as follows. The iPhone 5S scored a 12.89 megabits per second down and 3.28 up, while the Nexus 5 scored 12.9 megabits per second down and 3.24 up. So basically they're identical, meaning the Wi-Fi antennas in both devices are going to give you just about the exact same performance. Next up, let's take a look at the cameras on these two devices. So the Nexus 5 has an 8 megapixel camera with an f2.5 aperture, as well as optical image stabilization, which is super important for those low light shots as well as for video recording. Now the iPhone 5S has an 8 megapixel camera with a bit wider aperture at f2.2 as well as larger pixels. So whereas the Nexus 5 is going to use image stabilization to create better low light, the iPhone 5 has larger pixels which are going to allow more light. So if you are in a lower light situation, it's going to try to compensate instead of having to use some sort of stabilization. Now, as far as video quality goes, the Nexus 5 and the iPhone 5S both have 1080p video cameras. However, like said, the Nexus 5 has that optical image stabilization, which is going to allow you to get much smoother looking shots. With that, the iPhone 5S does have slow motion recording, 720p at 120 frames per second. So they really both level each other out. When you're filming at 1080p, the Nexus 5 does look much smoother and it's going to be able to compensate for a shaky hand. However, you do get that nice feature of the slow-mo on the iPhone 5S. So once you're done taking your pictures on these two devices, you're going to need something to edit them. And the Nexus 5 and the 5S both have built-in photo editing. Now, on the Nexus 5, Android 4.4 KitKat has upgraded the internal photo editor to make it much more advanced and allow you to do a lot more with it. So you have options to do filters, frames, crop, adjust curves, vignette, contrast, shadow, sharpening, and you really get the point. There's a ton of different options to really get your photos looking as professional as possible. Now, the iPhone 5S is a bit simpler. It only gives you options for rotate, auto enhance, which simply just adjusts some of the color and white balance. There's a few filters that you can get. They're pretty Instagram-like, as well as red eye removal and cropping. So obviously the Nexus 5 is going to have a bit of an advantage. It's giving you more capabilities over your photos so you can really fine tune and make the pictures look as great as possible. Now, on the lock screen of these devices, there's a couple different ways to lock them. We all know the iPhone 5S is known for that fingerprint scanner. However, the Nexus 5 has a couple more ways to unlock than just a fingerprint scanner, PIN, and password. You have the ability to slide to unlock. You have face unlock, which is really an overlooked feature, so you can actually take a picture of your face and it'll scan your face every single time. There's pattern unlock, so you can actually draw a 9-point pattern. There's pin unlock, and then of course you can have that alphanumeric password. Now finally, battery life. This is really the most important feature on any cell phone, because if your phone's dead, it means nothing. It's a giant paperweight. So the Nexus 5 has a 1570 milliamp hour battery. This is going to give you roughly 10 hours of hardcore use. The iPhone 5 has a 2300 milliamp hour battery, which is going to give you a bit longer battery life at roughly 12 to 13 hours. However, if you're a lightweight user, or if you're just not sitting there streaming videos and playing games all day, each phone's really going to last you a full day, and there's really no need to worry about battery life on either of these devices. So let's talk about pricing and configuration, because this is really where the Nexus 5 flies over the competition. You can buy the Nexus 5 off contract, fully unlocked, for $350 for the 16 gigabyte model. For just $50 more, you can upgrade yourself to a 32 gigabyte model. And now let's compare that to the iPhone 5S off contract. $650 gets you the 16 gigabyte, and an additional $100, so $750, gets you the 32 gigabyte. Now, in the iPhone's defense, a lot of people are buying this on contract, and with that, it's $200 for the 16 gigabyte and $299 for the 32 gigabyte, and you have that option to jump to the 64 gigabyte at $400 on contract. Now, regarding color, the Nexus 5 comes in black or white. The black has a full soft touch plastic body, whereas the white actually has a glossy back as well as glossy black sides. The iPhone 5S comes in 3 different colors: silver, gold, as well as space gray. But still, at the end of the day, the Nexus 5 coming in at $350 off contract is insane. This phone is seriously incredible. It's one of the fastest Android phones I've ever used. It's running the latest software. It has a great camera, and obviously that price point is just ridiculous. Really, it's not able to be beaten by any phone on the market at this time. However, if you can justify spending the extra $300, the iPhone 5 may be your choice. But really, guys, it comes down to Android versus iOS. That's the ultimate question that we always seem to run into. Nexus 5 and the 5S are going to be very fast phones. You're not going to have hiccups or lag or stutter. You're going to have great camera performance. You're going to have awesome battery life. And it really just comes down to that choice of saving your money and going with Android, spending the extra money and going with iOS. But even spending that extra money, iOS isn't always the operating system for everybody. Myself personally, I like Android, so I would even spend that extra money to have an Android device rather than an iOS device. But that's just me, and we want to hear from you guys. What would you like more, the Nexus 5 or the iPhone 5S? And if the prices were reversed and the iPhone 5S was $350 off contract and the Nexus 5 was $650 off contract, would you spend the extra money for the Nexus 5? Let us know in the comment section below. Anyways, guys, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you want to see more content covering the Nexus 5 and the iPhone 5S, you can always subscribe. Don't forget, it's free. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Later.